Hello everyone, I'm Sally and welcome to today's Atta webinar. Today I'm joined by Peter Allison, who spent almost a decade as a guide, camp manager and guide trainer before management grew tired of all of the vehicles that he broke. These days, he's a sales manager for natural selection, but occasionally leads trips with someone else at the helm. His misadventures have appeared in 3 books, including the popular Whatever You Do, Don't Run. Now, before I begin, I would like to remind everyone listening that if you do have any questions during the presentation, there should be a Q&A box on your screen if you move your mouse around, and you can click on that and type your question into the box. I will then fill these to Peter at the end. If you miss any information during the webinar, please don't worry, as a recording will be sent out to all of you afterwards, which will include some email contact details should you have any further questions. So I will now hand over to Peter.
Thanks, Sally, and thank you everybody for logging in. Today is not so much a product training session, it actually isn't one at all, but more just about natural selection and who we are, where we are, and also why we are, in a sense. So starting with the latter there, the why. The company began only 3 and a bit years ago. It's grown very, very fast, as I'm sure you've noticed. Part of the reason for forming was some industry veterans who felt that a lot of safaris, the focus had shifted from the experience outside the tent to the thread count inside of it. And I think we're all seeing a shift in the industry away from the Trump Hotel level that we're seeing. And this is not to knock many of our colleagues. I'm a huge fan of Singita and their conservation efforts, for example, Royal Portfolio, great people. But it's more just to say that there's a big niche, and particularly in countries like Botswana, for people that want to travel to see wildlife and have amazing experiences in truly wild areas. And that seemed to have dropped off the radar a bit. So we wanted to bring it back to that. We're certainly not allergic to luxury. I'm creaking more and more as the years go by and do like a comfortable bed. So we have a fantastic range of camps at different price points. But one of the other philosophies we have is to bring those price points down a bit. We work on the idea of having a full camp at a fair price rather than seeing how high we can go until people stop booking. And it's been pretty successful so far, so thank you all for your support. I'm going to jump into, again, a little bit further onto the why, the deeper on the why, which was a belief that we could actually increase areas for wildlife. That's obviously bucking a trend, not just in Africa, but anywhere in the world. So we quite often operate in areas that are outside core protected regions. So Menawa, our very first camp, is actually in an area zoned for agriculture rather than wildlife, outside a national park. And it's just helping to extend the natural ranges of any number of animals. We're also giving away 1.5% of our turnover. I think that's important that it's turnover, not profit. We actually began with the idea of being a not-for-profit organization, but we were convinced that we could give more money to conservation by having a more standard business model, generating more revenue and therefore being able to do it. And of course, the people who advised us on that were dead right. We are, in 3 years, we're sitting at just under $500,000 US that we have already given away or set aside for conservation projects. These have a big range in what we're doing. So everything from studying the zebra migration in Botswana, which is making an extraordinary comeback, and then implementing ways to help protect it and grow that, through to leopard movements up in the Kwai area where they're moving between private reserves or private concessions and into village areas, just to look at how that human-wildlife conflict can be alleviated. A lot of really exciting projects that we'll be happy to share with you and posting more and more about as we get into them. In terms of I think I said the where and the why. I don't think I mentioned who. So the founders of the company are Dave Van Smeerdijk and Dr. Jennifer Lally, a husband and wife team in the top right image here. Colin Bell below them, straight below them. I'm sure many of you are familiar with him. And James Ramsey up in the top left. But we have many, many partners in our operations. And I'll explain how some of those partnerships work. I think if there's one thing that still confuses people about natural selection, it's how we operate. Are we just a marketing company? Are we a management company? So I'll give a bit of an explanation. But just to go into some of those founders and some of the early staff, as I said, I'm sure you all know Colin, famous for founding Great Plains, and before that, Wilderness Safaris. I'm looking dead sexy in the upper middle photograph there with Chris McIntyre. In fact, if you look at that photograph upper middle there, that is Wilderness Safaris in its entirety in 1983. Is that vehicle and those two guys. That's what they began. I think what people forget is that prior to that, both of them had actually already been guiding for a number of years. Colin since the 1970s, if not before. There is a theory that he actually saw dinosaurs, perhaps wiped them out, and that's why he's so into conservation today. Nobody really knows, but he's definitely still got the energy of a far, far younger man and drives us all nuts because of it. Even more legendary, perhaps, than Colin is Jack Bousfeld in the top left corner there on the quad bike. Famous for going into the pans when everybody said you were crazy to do it, and that's exactly why he wanted to be there. And then, of course, his son Ralph set up Jack's camp in his honour, which is 26 this year and about to have its first rebuild. Dave Van Smeerdijk, I hope you all know him. He's in the centre left there. Also from a background in guiding. His wife Jen in the upper right, Dr. Jen, I should say, worked on safaris before gaining her PhD studying lichens in the Skeleton Coast, where she discovered about a dozen species. Bottom left, you have Henny Rawlinson, our operations manager in Botswana, one of the original bush pilots, again going back to the 1970s. Almost unrecognizable from that photo there. And then bottom right is me back in my guiding full head of hair days. So we come from a background of living and working in the bush. And that's why we're quite enamored of stepping back in time, really bringing it back to the experiences. There's a bunch of buzzwords in travel like experiential and transformational. And a lot of these things were what we've always just done on safari. We just didn't have a trendy label for them that you could align your chakras to, or whatever it is that you're meant to do these days while posting it on Instagram. People just came to Africa, did cool things, and had their minds blown. So there's a lot of what we're talking about is not actually that new. It's a little bit old-fashioned, in fact. But we're not completely retro. We do have a love of things like solar electricity, solar heating, because, of course, we didn't have those options back in the 70s and 80s and even early 90s. And the opportunity to be far more sustainable in our operations is really, really key to our success. So I mentioned how we operate. As I said, this I do think causes some confusion for people. We are partnered with a lot of owner-operators. I think most of you are familiar with East Africa, and up in that part of the world, there's a lot of owner-operators. Botswana and Namibia, in particular, there doesn't seem to be a lot of that. A few more in Zimbabwe. We've got a collection of wonderful owner-operated properties and overland companies that we have typically bought part of, but never more than 50%. So a really good example of that is Uncharted Africa, founded by Ralph Bousfeld of the famous Jack's Camp. And he has since cut his hair since his photo, but he hasn't lost the smile. The reason he's smiling so much is that we bought into his company. He still owns half of it, as he's always done since its inception. But I think it's the first time where he's had partners who all come from a safari background and hear his craziest ideas and say that they're absolutely bonkers, let's make them happen. And so he's absolutely smiling, not just because he's got a nut in his hand, but he's the happiest man in Botswana at the moment. He's up there right now, partly because he's got good partners, or we like to think so, but because he's able to achieve a lot more now. We've put a lot of investment into Uncharted from acquiring and renovating Mapula. We've renovated Sand Camp and Camp Kalahari already. And then at the end of this year, Jack's Camp, which is such an icon, is getting a complete rebuild. And we're actually talking about this just before the webinar. Anybody who's a bit frightened thinks we're going to ruin it. It is evolution, not revolution. We want the same look and feel. We want the people who've loved it for decades to still feel at home there. And certainly we didn't get involved with Ralph to tell him he was doing everything wrong. We love what he's doing. We just want him to be able to do more. So that's the way we work with our partners. And again, for those of you that know Ralph, I'm sure you know that he's a genius in the bush, but can be a bit of a disaster outside of it. So he's not allowed to play with spreadsheets anymore. We handle all of that. What we do is make sure that the beds are full, and then he makes sure that the people staying with him and his team are having a fantastic time. And that seems to be working really, really well. For those of you that haven't been into any of the uncharted properties for a while, we'd love to have you back there. So we do believe the best way for you to sell the properties is to visit them. So please come on through. So moving on to the where we operate, we've recently opened in South Africa, which brings us to 3 countries. We started in Botswana with Menawa, as I said, expanded into Namibia last year, South Africa now, and for those who haven't been keeping up, in 4 or 5 days' time, so Monday, 4 days' time, I think that is, we have a new property, Tuludi, opening in Botswana. This diversity of places from Namibia through to Botswana, and not just the Okavango, but down into the Kalahari, into South Africa, gives us a really diverse suite of properties. There's no cookie cutter here. This is not like going from one Starbucks to the next. So having diverse locations and diverse partners who've all got their own personal stamp on it means that there's a common thread of service, there's a common thread of guiding that we insist upon, but there's a really high quirk factor. I think Shipwreck Lodge really shows that off well up in the top middle. I imagine most of you have seen images of that. I personally think it is both the coolest lodge, figuratively and literally, in Southern Africa in many, many years. And what I particularly love is it's not only locally built, of course, but the architect is a Namibian, and it was her concept once she knew where it was going to be. And again, everybody said she was crazy, but we said that's the best idea, let's build that. Really, really a fantastic place to visit, and just aesthetically incredible. Through to the sky beds in this image just below then, again, bringing it back to an extraordinary experience. And it isn't reliant, the sky beds experience isn't reliant on lions being up close to you. It's actually spending a night under the African stars, which people might be on their 7th or 8th safari and have never done. And then if you move across the left with the unpronounceable beach lodge at De Hoop Coastal Reserve, possibly the longest lodge name in history. In fact, I believe it is longer than a haiku. But there you can immerse in extraordinary history, from where de Klerk helped overturn apartheid through to caves where recently discovered were the oldest remains of Homo sapiens found anywhere in the world. So you have the story of the birth of humanity through to the dawn of democracy, which is told with a whale on one side of you and zebras and eland walking by the other. It's a really, really extraordinary place. So diversity of properties, diversity of characters that you're going to meet, but a commonality in terms of service and quality of guiding. That's really what we're aiming to achieve with this fantastic suite of lodges. So, of course, I said we are in Botswana. Really important to remember, Botswana is not just the Okavango Delta. I think 90 to 95% of the marketing you see is for the Okavango Delta, and 90 to 95% of Botswana is Kalahari, something else. So it's really important to get to these other areas, not just for us to make money, but to show the Botswana government how much value there is in what is sometimes called marginal areas. Namibia, we operate from a private reserve adjacent to Etosha down to the Hwaneb River Valley, the famous Shipwreck Lodge, and the soon to be opened Kwesi Dune Lodge in the Namibran Nature Reserve right by Sossusvlei. That's coming to you early next year. And then in South Africa, this fantastic property that has just opened on the beach, as I mentioned there. They all offer, I think, a redefinition of what the word safari means. Sometimes words broaden in their meaning, but I really think that the word safari has narrowed and narrowed from its original Swahili meaning of just to go on a journey to these days it means bouncing around a four-wheel drive with somebody showing you things. And we're trying to grab that word back and give it a broader meaning again. A safari could be sitting on this beach and staring out at the horizon as 300-400 southern right whales play in the water there, surrounded by dolphins. A safari could be meeting a himba crossing the dunes somewhere outside Hwaneb, or a safari could be getting up close to a leopard as it makes a kill, and you're watching that from the comfort of a vehicle. It's a much broader word than it's been narrowed down to, and that's really, I think, another part of the why we came about, was to give that word back some of its meaning. But that conservation element, which I think we will be talking about in the future, is incredibly important. I think without that, you don't attract people with passion. And without people with passion, you end up back at that Starbucks Safari Lodge, which is very much the same as the one you went to before. And you don't remember the manager's name, you don't remember the guide's name a day after you've left. That's a tragedy if that ever occurs. So that's pretty much it. This is a nice brief one for you. I think the product ones will be far longer. So we will be back here to talk about conservation soon. But for now, if you have any questions, we would love to hear them. I don't know why my screen's just done that.
Thanks so much, Peter. I will field any questions that come through now. So as mentioned before, if anyone has any questions, please type them into the Q&A box on your screen. It's not the chat box, it's the other one.
Be brave, ask questions. Doesn't anybody even really want to know how old Colin is?
I'm sure some will come through. Oh, I think the sound disappeared for a while. I can see a couple coming through now. Sound's back. We can see the whales. Are the paraffin lanterns going at Jack's? That is from Gara.
Okay, Gara, nice to hear from you. Yes and no. So Jack's with the rebuild is going to be 100% solar powered. That is mainly back of house, of course. The rooms are going to have paraffin lamps, but with an electric bulb. And there's a number of reasons for that. One was the very expensive lesson at Sand Camp where we got some bad paraffin that stained all of that fabric. They also just don't throw off enough light. If you think most of the people you send us, they're a little bit further from the stalk and closer to the reaper. They need a bit more light at night, and I'm classing myself in that as well. And so, I mean, we would have installed these already, but Ralph has been obsessing for 6 or 7 months now over getting a light that mimics the flickering, or at least the quality of light from the paraffin lantern, but provides enough light for people to see going to the bathroom at night. And that is exactly why we want to be partnered with someone like him. He obsesses over those details. So the main area will still be lit entirely by paraffin lanterns, but your room is going to have stronger lighting.
Thanks, Peter. A question from Brigitte. What are some of the strategies that you're using to get the government to pay attention to these uncommon or marginalised areas?
So work as much as we can. And when we say the government, we're dealing with 3, but it does, so those interactions vary. Part of it is actually proving the profitability of it. And in fact, I'm going to guess that question was directed towards Botswana, but a really interesting case is Safari Hook in Namibia, which is the one to the south of Etosha and adjacent to it. That was hunting land until very recently, but it's privately owned. We had approached the owner and said that we could, and this is quite a ballsy thing to say, that we could make more money from photographic tourism from hunting, because the hunting claim is always that they generate more revenue. We asked for 5 years to achieve it, and we actually managed it in 1. And so just that alone, I think, gets people rethinking what you can and can't do with sustainable, non-consumptive wildlife tourism. In terms of what we're doing down in the Makharihari Pans, we have a village like Gweta, which is the nearest centre to us. We employ as much as we possibly can from Gweta itself. And then we have operational areas that employ from down near Francistown, which is a severely depressed area at the moment, economically depressed. And when we're able to show those results in terms of employment, in terms of tax revenue that we create, I think that at least gives us some leg to stand on should there be somebody wanting to use the land for something else. I know that uni in Bolivia, they're looking at that to mine lithium, and I'm going to guess that we've got some valuable minerals under the Makharihari. So it's really important that we protect that.
Okay, a couple of questions from Rosemary and Hannah, which you can answer at the same time, which are basically asking if you're going to extend to other countries in Africa, mainly East Africa.
We've been approached by some operators who we love. We love what they're doing up in East Africa. And just the timing wasn't right. We're still toddlers, effectively. We're corporate toddlers. We've only just got up and moving, so it would require a whole new base of operations. I'm not saying no, I'm just saying not yet. We have looked at Angola as well. I think it's really important that our industry starts doing some conservation work up there. All the work we do in Botswana is meaningless if the source to the Okavango goes kaput. So we have, a number of us have travelled up there. We've looked at what opportunities there are. We're quite enthused about doing something there. We're just trying to figure out what that would be. I know I'm constantly goading Ralph to try to get something set up in Ethiopia. He's got quite a bit of money, so he could do that, I hope. But he spends it on safari camps, which is why I really like him. So that's a possibility as well, but there's no immediate plans for those.
Thanks, Peter. I just added the Angola question there from Malcolm to the questions you were answering just now, but I think you've covered that, so we'll let that one go. There's one from Brigitte again, which says, what would you say owner-operated lodges are missing from travel agents?
I'm not sure there's anything specific. I think it's always worth mentioning when a place is owner-operated, because even if it's somebody's first safari, they understand going into any sort of business, even if it's a retail corner store, if it's the owner at the till, it's a different experience typically to if it's a disgruntled employee or even a gruntled employee, but just they're there doing it as a job. Be it a B&B in Belfast or a high-end hotel, if the owner is directly involved, you do get a really different level of input. And it's not necessarily even about the service. I think it's just that attention to detail and genuine investment, both financial and emotional, in the guests enjoying themselves. So it's worth mentioning owner-operated, and that's what sets these apart, these properties. But to broaden it out to the question you didn't ask, something I would ask is when we have an issue, and to address the elephants in the room with what's happened with Botswana and a lot of negative press, I understand that there's a lot of public sentiment out there, people saying let's boycott. If they're doing that because they love elephants, as I said, I understand the sentiment that would drive that. But I'd beg of you as agents who have influence over your clients to get them to look at it the other way, that if they don't want hunters to take over land, support the photographic operators. And this is something I really firmly believe in, is the louder our view, the more people we've got, the louder our voice is with the government, and the more we can say that hunting is absolutely unnecessary financially. From a conservation point of view, we all know there are far better ways control elephants than shooting them. This is going to lead to far more human-wildlife conflict. So we right now need more support. We don't need people encouraging boycotts. And if somebody's suggesting going elsewhere because Botswana may or may not reintroduce hunting, please try to talk them off a ledge or allow us to speak to them. I'd be personally happy to speak to anybody and just explain the situation from our standpoint.
Okay, next question is from Glenn, who is wondering why you have gone for a peak season price for August for Botswana, which is unlike other operators.
That's a very good question. And I know that there was some resistance both internally and externally when it came out. The reality is that, I'm not just speaking for natural selection here, and I've got colleagues from the industry on the line, they can chime in, but most of us make money if we're lucky 4 months of the year, break even if we're lucky for 4 months of the year, and definitely lose money for 4 months of the year. So we do actually need to maximize the money when we can. Unless you're going to fill us in January and February. If you guys start doing that, we'll drop the August peak. That's the reality. It's not about greed at all. It's just that that point our beds fill no matter what. And we are, we've got to try to maximize. We have operating costs that run throughout the year that are set whether we've got people in the lodge camp or not. And so we need to make hay while the sun is shining. And I'm sorry, it isn't motivated by greed at all. If we were greedy, we wouldn't be in ecotourism.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, and the next question is asking whether, as part of the natural selection team, or as the natural selection team, are you also involved in assisting with the efforts to relieve the negative impact of the drought that's taken over Namibia and some of Botswana?
I think that's a really good question again, which is always a fantastic way to stall and say, I don't know the answer. But it is a good question. I did see a list yesterday of all of the programs we're supporting. I don't remember seeing something about drought relief on there. Our efforts typically, which are conservation-based, that always does involve our neighbouring communities. So thus far, I don't think it's included drought relief, but that may well be something that arises. We have, when I mentioned the funds that we've raised, we deliberately don't obviously give them away all at once. So should there be some conservation emergency that arises, we can address it. In terms of Botswana, they have a really good social safety net. I don't know that we would need to get involved in direct aid to the communities that surround us and we employ from. Namibia could be a different kettle of fish, but I'm not entirely sure. But I am actually going to look that one up.
Okay, a question from Geraldine. Will Jackal and Hyde remain as a photographic lodge or be more like Sable Alley or Tuludi and be more generalized? I might have pronounced that wrong, sorry.
I'm not sure which part you pronounced wrong, but it all sounds... the scenario there was being used by our friends from Pangolin Photographic Safaris, and they wanted a toehold on the Okavango. We own that property and we operate that property as part of the Kwai Private Reserve, which includes the camps you mentioned, Sable Alley and Tuludi, also Hyena Pan and the Sky Beds. We offered to take it over from them because we could see they weren't quite hitting the numbers they wanted. And again, they were paying rent whether they were full or not. We are honouring all of their bookings that are in place for that property. Once those have run through, we're going to convert the room that was used specifically for photographic processing into a second lounge, and then it will be more of a general camp. Just so you know that the Pangolin exit from that property, there's no animosity in that. It's pretty much how Brexit should have been done. It's just, you guys happy? No, thanks. Okay, we'll take over. And that's how it all worked. So it's we're still good friends with them, and we are running it as an FIT camp now at an extraordinarily good price. The thing to bear in mind with all these properties is whether you're staying at Jackal and Hyde or Tuludi, lions aren't going to, if you're staying at Jackal and Hyde, lions aren't going to go chasing after the smell of rich people. You're going to have the same experiences outside the room. I really love Jacqueline Hyde. It's my kind of camp.
Thanks, Peter. We've got one last question from Charlotte, who is saying that we've had a few challenges booking your Botswana camps due to limited availability, sometimes a year in advance. What lead time would you advise that they need to be working on?
Well, I'm guessing because of the date, I can slander our friends in the US and say it's all their fault. Don't imagine any of them are listening today. But I think we do have different patterns globally as to how far out people book, and the US has stretched back out to booking about a year out, and they do tend to fill those peak seasons. Please always, though, approach our reservation staff. If you don't have a link to our Knightsbridge availability, we'll be very happy to share that with you. It's real-time live availability for our properties. And if you can see on that light blue that is provisionally held, we will be happy to chase up that space for you. We're also always prepared to play reservations Tetris and see where we can find the space to fit you in to those properties. I don't know what more I can give you than that. Unfortunately, peak season is peak season because it's full. I would love to be able to build more rooms just over that time, but we have very strict allocations as to how many rooms we can have in any given area.
Okay, we've had a couple more questions come through. So there's one from Nomsa here. Would you say that you have seen a declining demand in the destination? And do you think price has mostly to do with it? Are you hearing that Botswana is an expensive destination? So I think this all refers to Botswana.
Nomsa, thank you for that. I think, so our experience as Natural Selections, obviously only 3 and a bit years old. And we are generally, our pricing is warmly received. And a lot of people have said to us, fantastic to have high quality products at a fair price. I mean, it's not cheap, we know that. And then often off the back of that is everybody else is getting so expensive, I can't book it anymore. And yet I've believed that Mombo is still running at 80%. So it's obviously not too expensive for some markets. So as we said, we're trying to attract the people that want to be there for the wildlife experiences, the cultural experiences, the landscape experiences. And so we're trying not to price it just at as high as we can. And that has certainly worked for us. Obviously, as I said, it's not cheap. Sable Alley at $1,000 a night. I mean, I can't stay anywhere for $1,000 a night. So there's still only a segment of the world that can afford that, but it's certainly affordable for a lot of people. And I think value. I think that's really what we're aiming for. And I think that's probably what we're hearing most of all, is that there's not a lot of value anymore in Botswana, and people have been really appreciative of our pricing because of that.
Okay, one more question. Out of interest, what is your personal answer to a client who doesn't want to travel to Botswana because of the reintroduction of hunting by the government?
I think I'd go back to what I was saying earlier, in that if they want to help elephants, they can do so much more by visiting than they can by staying away. So personally, I've got a really knee-jerk reaction to trophy hunting. If it ever has a benefit for conservation, that's an accidental side effect. It's never its intention. It's not to say it has never benefited conservation, but there's been a lot of really bad things in the world that have had positive consequences as a small side effect. I don't think anybody in the world wakes up desperate to protect elephants, does their research and decides, you know what, I need to shoot the one with the biggest tusks. That's how I'm going to do my bit. It's people that want to do that and then find a justification. So if we can stop those people by preserving these areas for photographic use, then we're doing a great job, but we do need the support. We don't have billionaires backing us and saying, I'll just put this land aside and nobody can go into it to harm animals or even to view them. We just don't have that. So I'd suggest come and visit.
that's the best possible way to look after Africa's wildlife. Staying away doesn't help them at all.
There is one final question which you have sort of answered already, but just for Glenn, will you be introducing a live availability system to speed up the booking process, or is there one already?
We have a live ability link, which is linked to our Knightsbridge system, reservation system based out of Cape Town. It's a grid of all of our properties. That is something that we can share with anybody that would like it. I hope you all would. We're building an agent zone in the back of our website that is going to have a more in-depth version of that. But that's internet web developers seem to be a little bit like politicians in how quickly they deliver on their promises. So, yeah, I'm not sure how long that will take, I'm afraid.
And that is all the questions we have for now. Peter, thank you so much for your presentation this afternoon in the UK. Thank you everyone else for attending, and we hope to see you all again next time. As mentioned before, I will send an email out to everyone with a link to the webinar recording, and there'll be an email contact on there should you have any further questions later on today or moving forwards. Thanks again, Peter.
Thank you very much.